I know I've done a few videos on the Warriors already, but I think most of them have been Draymond suspension related. I wanted to talk about, well, I'm going to talk about the Draymond suspension, partly anyway, but I wanted to talk about the Warriors themselves because, as everybody knows, I have a lot of Warriors stock on this channel, and things have been kind of uneven through their first 20 or so games. But since the suspension, I've noticed a change because I've had a few issues with one, head coach Steve Kerr and how the Warriors have been playing, etc. And one of those issues I have been having with the Warriors, and this was before the Draymond suspension, or I guess even the first suspension. Draymond's been suspended multiple times now. The problem I had with the Warriors before this season, going back to last season, is that Steve Kerr just had a propensity to give the younger players that the Warriors have drafted over the last few years just inconsistent minutes. And for a team that is very veteran heavy, I just felt like that was sort of malpractice to not at least give your young players reps, especially when they had proven to provide something valuable to the Warriors that they hadn't had in a minute. The nadir of that was the Sacramento Kings game, the in-season tournament game, where Moses Moody was absolutely on fire, and Steve Kerr elected to take him out and bring in Kevon Looney and not, let Moses Moody close in a small ball lineup. And in that same Sacramento game, Steve Kerr did not play Brandon Pajemski, their late first rounder this past summer, even though he had displayed that he is a reliable ball handler, a solid defender, just another player who is a high IQ guy, can make the right pass. But since the Draymond suspension, Steve Kerr has had no choice but to play the younger guys. And I think this new Draymond suspension, however long it lasts, this is going to benefit the Warriors in the long run. Let's start with Brandon Pajemski first, because he has just been a godsend for the Warriors. Just somebody that could maybe provide an answer to what type of three-guard lineups the Warriors would roll with. And Brandon Pajemski has been starting ever since the Draymond suspension. And in that time, Brandon Pajemski has been averaging 12 points a game, 7.5 rebounds per game. Brandon Pajemski, he looks small on TV, and then you look at his profile and he's actually 6'5". He's always been a good rebounder in all the games that he's played. He really fights for the offensive rebounds. He throws his body around and tries to draw loose ball fouls whenever he's going for a rebound. He's always on the floor, but he's averaging over 7.5 rebounds per game, or nearly 7.5 rebounds per game in the starts he has gotten since the Phoenix game. On the year, he's shooting 40% from three, and he's just one of those smart rookies that knows how to space. You'll see him on some offensive possessions pointing to other players, telling them where to stand, where to space out. He's just another ball handler that can bring the ball up the court while Steph and Clay run in transition or run their off-ball actions. He's somebody himself who can get to the cup. He's crafty. He has a nice little floater. Lefty, so I always got love for my lefties. And he's a solid defender. Just somebody that was just a really good find by the Warriors. Mike Dunleavy, in his first year as a GM, by the way, has killed this draft, because we're going to the next rookie, Trayce Jackson-Davis, and he is somebody who has played sparingly, but whenever he has gotten games where he's played over 10 minutes, he's produced. And finally, these last 5 games, I think Steve Kerr has realized, and he said this a few games ago, Trayce Jackson-Davis is going to play. He's kind of been better than Kevon Looney this year, low-key. I think Kevon will bounce back, but just those young legs is just something the Warriors need at the center position. In the last 5 games, Trayce Jackson-Davis has been averaging over 11 points per game, nearly 9 rebounds per game, and is shooting 73.5% from the field. He is somebody that provides a nice lob threat for Chris Paul, and Chris Paul always does well with lob threats like that. For a while, it was Dario Saric as the small ball 5, and while the Chris Paul, Dario Saric pick and pop worked, Chris Paul just needed somebody that could provide pressure rolling hard to the rim, and that's what Trayce Jackson-Davis does. So Trayce Jackson-Davis and Dario Saric have been playing together in those bench units, which have been killing teams if you just look at the numbers. The Warriors have needed somebody at the center position that is very athletic, can just grab every rebound in sight, even at 6'9". He has a very long wingspan, big hands, and has run a little bit of the dribble handoff stuff the Warriors like to do. He's averaging over 2 assists per game, but he's providing some of the handoff stuff that they trust Looney with. And Trayce Jackson-Davis out of that action can just roll to the rim or even do screen and roll with Chris Paul or Steph Curry. He was really big in that Celtics game. Defensively, he just knows how to time blocks on the weak side. And a lot of draft nerds that I follow aren't really surprised by how good Trayce Jackson-Davis is. They don't understand how he went 57th, which is near the bottom towards the end of the draft in the second round. And then Jonathan Kuminga, finally this year, just seemed like he's getting more consistent minutes, even though there are still games where he'll play like 10 minutes, 9 minutes. But these last 7 starts for him since the Draymond suspension, we are finally seeing what it's like when he is allowed to work through his reps and is not worried about Steve Kerr pulling him whenever he makes a mistake. Jonathan Kuminga in his last 7 starts has been averaging 14 points a game, 40% from 3 on over 2 attempts per game, and is shooting nearly 60% from the field. And they're trusting him with some stuff in the offense, like when he has a mismatch, like a smaller player on him, he just goes straight to the rack. He's been making quicker decisions too, and a lot of people accuse Jonathan Kuminga of being a low IQ player. I just think he's been looking over his shoulder coming off of the bench because he knows if he fucks up, he's going to get pulled. And so he thinks a beat too longer than what he should and ends up making a mistake, and then he gets pulled. Here, he is allowed to just attack off instinct. He's really fast off the dribble. Sometimes it looks like he's out of control, but I feel like he's been in more control lately, finishing at the rim, finishing over mismatches, and he's taking threes with confidence. Will still shoot the little mid-ranger every once in a while, but I don't mind that, honestly. I'm all for young players figuring themselves out and getting reps, because that's the only way you'll develop is through real game time reps. And going back to the Boston game, he can really lock down defensively when he puts his mind to it. He did a hell of a job on Jason Tatum, did a hell of a job on Jaylen Brown whenever he was switched on to him, and he's just something the Warriors need right now. An athletic wing with just high upside scoring the ball, high upside defending people, because Andrew Wiggins had not been playing well. That's why he was moved to the bench, and Andrew Wiggins low-key has been playing a lot better since coming off of the bench. Jonathan Kuminga needed these starts and these reps, and hopefully Steve Kerr keeps playing him. The guy I feel bad for the most is Moses Moody, because he plays like a vet and just seems like an old soul. He gets on the floor for loose balls. He's somebody who plays very hard, somebody who properly spaces the floor, shoots threes, just makes smart and sound decisions offensively. And for some reason, he just seems to get inconsistent minutes. Like in the Denver game on Christmas, he only got 2 minutes and didn't check in until the second quarter. But then he'll have games like I mentioned earlier, the game in the Sacramento in-season tournament game. He can go 3 for 3 from 3, make big shots, and then get pulled. And then he'll play in the Clippers games back-to-back and get 21 and 13 points, but then we'll play 15 minutes a few days later. I just hope Moses Moody gets more consistent minutes, and maybe that's a byproduct of the Warriors discovering that they have a lot of good players now, and Steve Kerr kind of has to juggle the rotation, and it's a pick-your-poison type of thing. But I would like to see Moses Moody get more consistent minutes. But my point in all of this is the Draymond suspension, I thought, was going to be a serious death blow to the Warriors, just in the sense of this team needed a run of games to figure it out. But it seems like in these last few weeks since the suspension, the Warriors have figured it out a bit. Since Draymond's suspension, the Warriors are 9th in offensive rating, 12th in defensive rating. The last 2 weeks, they've been 5th in offensive rating with a 5-2 record and a 117.6 defensive rating, which would be 12th. And looky here, surprise, surprise, Klay Thompson, the last 12 games, averaging 20 points per game, shooting 40% from three on nearly 10 attempts per game. I wasn't that worried about Klay Thompson's slump. We did this thing last year where everyone was calling him washed. And look, he is not the same player. I'm not here to suggest any of that. This is not prime 2019 Klay Thompson here. But with the lower extremity injuries he had, and he himself openly admitted he had to change his offseason routine the last few years, it was going to take a bit for Klay Thompson to rev up. And what do we know? We were doing the same thing this year. Klay Thompson looks washed. Well, he's rounding into form a little bit. He's not the same rebounder, not the same defender. He does have some terrible shot selection still, like he's Game 6 Klay all the time, but he's rounding into form. Steph has been struggling a little bit lately, but again, I have all the faith in Stephen Curry. The guy is a top 10 player of all time in my book, but they are starting to figure some stuff out. Steve Kerr starting to figure out how much he can trust the young guys, and I think that's going to benefit in the long run because Draymond is still a really good player, still an elite defender. I mentioned before the suspension, he was shooting like 40% from three and seemed to be taking more threes with confidence. And he is still a supercomputer when it comes to passing and doing all the off-ball action splits they do. So I'm sure it comes as a surprise to people who have been subscribed to this channel for a long time. I am not selling my stock in the Warriors just yet.